Hello, everybody, and welcome to edition number 60 of the Frank and Stan Chat. And yes, we have another guest with us this week. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning.
Yes,
morning,
yeah, and good morning, Stan.
Good morning,
Yeah.
Dave, Frank, everyone.
I know. So I believe, well, I know that Stan and Dave go back a long way. So let's ask Dave just to introduce himself and how he knows Stan and what, why he's here, this sort of thing.
Okay, I'm a colleague of Stan's. We used to work for the same large local authority in the Northwest, which you can guess which one it is probably. And 10 years ago, I was the head of schools HR. Stan was coming up with all sorts of great ideas as well, and we linked together. And but 10 years ago, we all had I had the opportunity to jump ship, and I took early retirement, and I've been an independent HR consultant working across the education sector since then.
Right. So, and you were saying before you're a governor as well?
I'm a governor, yeah. I'm a governor of a secondary academy about 5 miles away from where I live in South Ribble.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you with us, Dave. And I'm really looking forward to having this sort of HR angle as well. You were going to say something there, Stan?
I was just going to say, to put it in context, Dave was my HR advisor, although I think at the time you were my personnel advisor. I think it was still personnel at that point. And when I was first in headship, so it is a long time, you can tell.
Yeah, it's funny, we were chatting before, but I was saying how when you get a very good HR lead, and the organization I work for as the CEO, the HR leader, it's still the HR leader there, but she was absolutely brilliant at just telling me, Frank, don't do that. Or Frank, do it like that. And actually that conversation, I think I found, because she worked very closely with me, was a very regular conversation. So she would often say, Frank, I know what you're thinking. I wouldn't think like that, before I'd even told her.
Yeah, I have to say, Dave is of that school, because I can remember going to him over things like maternity leave and saying, this is what I want to do. And Dave just saying, no, you can't do that. You'll lose. What do you mean I'll lose? It's obvious. It doesn't matter what's obvious. You will lose.
I think sometimes there's a bit too much in the HR profession of you can't do that.
Yes.
I think there should be a bit more of you can do this. Let's give it a whirl. Let's give it a go and see how far we can push the boundaries a bit.
Yeah. I agree. And I think also it's interesting that some of the issues that I've dealt with in my career where sort of personnel issues have gone wrong has been because leaders that haven't had that sort of discussion about the risk that they're taking in the journey that they're on, and actually it's actually just understanding what those risks are right from the outset.
It is. It's knowing. It's all right. Knowing where all the boundaries are and what the rules of the game are and all the policies and procedures, but it's how you play the game in the middle, isn't it?
Yes.
And head teachers often say to me, because I get called in, they'll say, I'm getting this advice from, and the advice they're getting is about the procedure and a lot of wasps stuck in, and you need to be careful of that. I thought that HR person was in my squad, not refereeing the game. We know all of that. Just tell me how far I can push it.
Yeah.
They don't say it in those terms.
But
so I'm in the squad with them.
Yes.
We need to know where the gaps are and where we can pass the ball.
And to be fair, I was perhaps unfair to Dave there by saying he told you can't do that, you can't do that. What he would then follow up with, and this is genuine, is but what you can do is,
and it's usually not written down.
No, and you can get it to the same end.
Yeah, and I think
by a different route.
I think also that it's also seen I found the relationship I had with trade unions a very positive one, because actually that they would often call me up when they hear about something. There'd be nothing slight, always off the record, but there was a little bit, well, our position's likely to be like this, and I would then be able to explain my position. But that level of openness, and it was never adversarial. It was always, well, actually we'd like to resolve this as best we can.
And the answer's in there, isn't it? It's in that grey bit.
It is. It is.
I have to say, Frank, when I went to a different authority, it wasn't the unions themselves that were difficult, because actually the associations, when you meet with them and talk, are very reasonable. It was people at a lower level who would say, "Oh, you can't do that. The unions will go mad."
Yes.
the unions won't let us do that. And I, because of my upbringing, I'd say, have we talked to them? Have we actually said what we're proposing? Because it's in the best interest of their members. Let's talk to them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you can see, we haven't even got onto what's caught your eye this week. So, Dave, we'll go to you as the guest. What's caught your eye this week?
Well, what's caught my eye is I get a bulletin every week from the National Governors Association, and the most recent one, there's one due out today, had something in from what's called the Education Policy Institute about the impact of teacher retention because of the pandemic. And unsurprisingly, more people are thinking of jumping ship a bit earlier than would otherwise be the case. And this is against a backdrop of 30% of teachers leaving the profession within 5 years of qualification. So that was quite disturbing. I mean, some of the things that are in there, it's up from, for the end of this year, from 10% to 20%, summer 22 up from 17% to just short of 30, summer 25 up from 27% to 40%. Wow. So that was before we saw this latest uptick in the figures of children at home, and the DFE really, in my view, being well behind the curve in sending kids home, and they could see this coming in some respects, and only now are they looking at a solution to this. And then chucked in the mix, we get this, and let's ban mobile phones, as though that's number one on head teachers' lists at the moment. So that caught my eye.
I think there's also the sense that I think if you haven't got children in the school, you think the way this is sold to you is that the kids are walking around the corridors in classes, just using the phone. I mean, somebody said to me the other day that actually, the use of mobile phones in school is very restricted in many cases. But actually, you wouldn't get that if you weren't in a if you didn't really understand the school setting. And actually, I mean,
I sit on, I advise on a number of joint consultative committees, with an academy chain. That issue in all has never come up.
No,
it's an irritant, but it's never come up. We've had enough, say the members. No, that's not happened.
Yeah. No, but the latest push is for behaviour, because it's something that they know that people, general public, will get hold of. Behaviour needs sorting in schools, and we had Nick Gibb linking mobile phones to low-level disruption, which is ruining the classrooms and blah blah blah. And I noticed the latest, MPQ stuff. One of them is about behaviour, so you can be qualified in managing behaviour.
The thing is that I mean, I keep going back to Ofsted, but actually, we have undertaken thousands upon thousands of the inspectors inspected thousands upon thousands of schools over I don't know how many years, and if we did a search on mobile phones on any of those reports, I would be staggered if we find reference to it in 10 of those. And if it was such a big problem, you would hope that inspectors would highlight the use of mobile phones in classes, down corridors, interrupting school life. It's not there.
No. I used to have a quote that I used but when we got this regular thing of, children aren't concentrating, we need to ban X, Y, and Z. I had a quote that I used to use, and it said that children's education is suffering because they're spending too much time on there, and it was a blank. And I asked staff to put in, or people on the course, what's the missing word? And it went from computer games to computers to phones. And now, no doubt, it would be mobile phones. The actual answer is gramophone, because the quote's from 1912. So as far as I can see, from 1912 onwards, children have been disrupted in their education.
Yeah, but I think the main point for this is schools have shown themselves to be incredibly adaptable places. They even before the pandemic, they are able to turn, not quite on a sixpence, but they're very, very adaptable. But this is another thing where they don't need this at the moment. and who's going to police it? All the practicalities of it all are going to fall as an additional workload on school leaders, on people who want to get back to doing the main job, as it were. And I have a lot of sympathy with that.
Yeah, and I think our line has always been that you're best to let the decision making be done locally. And what we've got here is I mean, in a way, it's interesting, the consultation. I don't know if any of you have gone to the consultation on this. Actually, it's been pushed as if to say, well, we're giving the voice here to parents and to governors. Well, actually, to be honest, folks, if you don't work in a school, you can't answer any of the questions.
No.
Yeah, so it's in a sense, and the question on mobile phones is predominantly, it's worded in such a way that you have to agree with it. You know, so say, do you think that mobile phones are disruptive? That sort of a line, you know, well, well, they can be, can't they? You know, it's the sort of response you want to give. But anyway,
it's like the classic homework one, Frank. Do you remember that on the early inspections?
No, tell
Are you
me.
satisfied with the amount of homework? Everybody put no, because half of them thought it was too much and half of them thought it was too little. So nobody was ever satisfied.
Okay, well, Stan, what's caught your eye then?
Well, it's a mixture of two things. I was privileged to be on a training session run by Elizabeth Clavins on early years and the changes to early years. And that evening, I was reading a blog by Dennis Shirley about a new book that he and Andy Hargreaves have brought out. And they've sort of tried to identify, how do we re-engage students? How do we start, well, they call it kicking open the trap door of engagement. And they've come up with 5, I'll have to read these, they've come up with 5 areas: creativity, connection, empowerment, ownership, and mastery. And as I read into it, I thought, this is exactly the same as I've just heard on the early years development. And it's early years practice. It's what good early years teachers do. I'd like to say without thought, but that's doing them an injustice. They do it because they are professional about what they do, and they've got experience and knowledge and understanding of children. So there is creativity. You go in any reception class or nursery, there's creativity everywhere. There are connections with the children's home, with things they're interested in. You know, I bet you can't go in a reception class without seeing a dinosaur or a dragon or so. So that is going on, that connection. Empowerment, according to Dennis Shirley, is about giving people the chance to direct their own learning. Again, probably receptions at the nursery is the last time it happens in education until you're 18. Ownership and mastery. I think mastery, I find it a little bit overstated. Mastery for me is believing you can get better at what you're doing. And I think, you know, we need to look at computer game designers for that. They are brilliant at taking you step by step to a difficult level, which if that step wasn't there, you quite probably would say, oh, it's gone too hard now, I can't do it. And what we need to do is build in that persistence into education so we don't get put off by things. But to me, it was just early years, great practice, multiplied. Let's take it through the whole of the sector.
Didn't you feel as though when Barry Norris spoke about what the curriculum reforms were looking like in Wales?
Yeah.
Some people would say, well, it hasn't gone far enough. But actually, what it felt to me is if this idea that there is this compartmentalized set of knowledge for history, for geography, for science, whatever it is here, actually there was an attempt at a very macro level to actually sort of try and dispel that and try and connect those areas of learning in such a way that it led to that sort of, or led from that sort of approach that you're describing.
Yeah, can you imagine a 4-year-old having in their heads that geography is somehow different than science and is somehow different?
Well, I can't do that now.
That was what's caught my eye.
Great. Well, mine's on decency. And in a way, this is getting back to the Matt Hancock story and other senior politicians, you know, doing the decent thing and being honest and truthful. And for me, I think I just found out that this quite troubled by-election back in Spain. Basically, it looks as though the whole sort of electorate has been split into sort of three camps, and in a way, what I think has probably won it for the Labour candidate is, and also I have to say it was good that the Tory candidate didn't actually sort of run a sort of disgraceful sort of campaign, is that actually the campaigners who were trying to divide, you know, it looks as though they possibly have gained a foothold but haven't won. So it's this, you know, just trying to be positive about the sense of being honest and decent and trying to be respectful. You know, actually that I'm pleased to see that approach won, and it makes me wonder then about the Trump campaign in the US also probably being victorious for Biden because of a sort of very clear sort of decency and honest style. Forget the substance, but that was at the heart of that campaign. And in a way, I was interested, Dave, in thinking about all of this happening on a personnel issue. You know, you're advising government on, you know, these HR issues, which is basically what the Matt Hancock story is, isn't it? It's a breach of the code of conduct. I mean, would you have been advising him to say, you know, this is just not sustainable, you're going to have to go? Or
I absolutely would. I mean, for all the reasons that have been all over the press, but it was that little spell, wasn't it, between it being discovered and then the Prime Minister making the remarks that he did, and then Matt Hancock going, you know, somewhere in the middle of that, before Johnson said what he said, you know, somebody would have had a word in his ear through his trade union rep, perhaps, or one way or another, to say, you know, I don't think this is sustainable. And most reasonable people, and I count a lot of the, you know, a lot of the sort of regional officials that I work with within the trade union side, for example, as an illustration, would say, I know what you're doing, just leave it with me, will you? And I think that would have been, he would have come out of that with a little, or the whole thing would have had a bit more of a semblance of decency, as you say, Frank.
Yeah.
You know?
But also as the boss, I mean, I'm thinking about myself here. If that was a member of staff, I think that got to a point where I think it would have hit me very clearly that this is not a position I want to be seen to be defending.
Yes,
you know, because of the implications for everybody else and for myself. But that seems to have been lost. It
has been lost
by the Prime Minister.
I don't think he thinks fast enough to be able to do it, to give himself time, because obviously the answer was let me get time to investigate it. Let me see what goes on and how it affects his role, his job, blah blah. You could bluff a couple of days by saying I'm going to talk to him and see, and we'll. But instead, it's I back him and the matter's over. You know,
and he's not the first, is he? Because he's done the same previously, I think, with the Home Secretary. And also with the Community Secretary. There almost seems to be this sort of default position of, you know, form a ring around these people, we'll protect them, we'll just say it's past, it's gone, it's done. Did it with Cummings, didn't he, last summer? So it seems to be his modus operandi. Right?
I just wonder then if the reason for, you know, if he has got a reason, it's because of what happened when Cummings did go. He spills the beans on everything he knows, and maybe those others have also got lots of stuff they can pour out.
But isn't it important though, in a bit? I mean, let's move it into a school setting here. That actually, you know, the example that the key boss in the organisation sets, that tone is the tone that everybody sort of gravitates to. You know, so if actually there is then a sort of, well, you know, he or she, they're very relaxed about this, you know, then actually that whole approach becomes very relaxed amongst many members of staff. There are some laggards there, aren't there? You know, who are, you know, I think we all know them, and good on them for holding the line. You know, no, there's a level of competence, level of decency that I'm going to live by. I'm not going to be, you know, I'm going to fight against, or I'm going to move away from, you know, that sort of style.
And where's your, you know, what happens to your moral authority to lead? You get to a point, don't you, as some people say, well, there is no moral authority anymore. And you wonder whether this will eventually start to catch up with them. I think that's a worry within the the Tory backbenchers. I think that really came through or cut through when I was reading the reports.
Yeah, I think also, just to finish off the Batley and Spen issue, it's really interesting how in the southern by-election, it looks as though the Labour vote collapsed completely and they voted anti-Tory. In Batley and Spen, the Lib Dem vote has collapsed, and it looks as though they voted Labour, which actually, has taken just enough votes to keep the Labour
counterweight.
Yeah. So I think there is a sort of emerging, and I think it's the decency thing here. There is, I trust that there is a majority of decent people in this country who will want to see the decent thing done, and done in the right way. And I'm hoping that group of people, as happened in America, is sufficient when it corrals together, that actually, unless political parties do decent things and are seen to be doing the right thing and being led the right way, I think that will eventually catch up with you, primarily because of good education at the end of the day. I mean, this is the heart of it, isn't it? That we're trying to develop, citizens of the future who want to live in a sort of fair and safe environment where people are not on the gain. And if you put a hard shift in and you work very hard and do the right thing, you will be rewarded by society. I think that's what I think we all live by.
Yeah, I think there's been this experiment, hasn't there? The same one in America, the same one here of well, it doesn't matter if you're honest and decent, as long as you double down and you keep saying the same thing over and over again. I mean, Prime Minister's question time now, the answer to every question is we're rolling out the vaccines. Yeah. It's every single question. And what's disappointing in a way is that's so predictable. Why haven't we undermined that standard answer? I think that's an issue with the opposition, that it's been allowed to be almost a non-answer time. It might be questions, but we're not getting any answers, and something has to change.
But in a way, there is I'm trying to bring this back to education as well, because actually, if this was an issue where the head teacher or CEO was being asked questions and all they said was, "Oh well, it's all down to where we are as a school." That's the response. What do you expect? We've all heard
displacement.
Yeah. So I mean, in a way, I think even within a school setting, there would be voices and pressure, whether that actually, Dave, might even be through the governing body, at the end of the day, that pressure would build and build and build.
I think it would, and I think it does happen. That I don't think it gets aired as publicly as it does in the upper echelons of government, but I think it does happen. We don't see it, or the public and parents don't see it all the time, but I've sadly been involved in those sort of situations where somebody's called time on a head teacher because their position becomes untenable. You can go through the treacle of a procedure and all it does is worsen the situation all ways round. So being able to have that sort of discussion through a good chair of governance perhaps, to say, look, now's the time to move on. It's not your moment anymore. Let people move on with a bit of dignity, or what's left of their dignity.
I mean, in some respects, I had a conversation with somebody this week, and they asked me, how many in your role as the CEO, how many people did you sack? I don't think I sacked anybody.
No.
Actually, all that happened was those conversations were such that the colleagues in positions felt as though it probably wasn't going to work, and it was best to start talking about what the next move should be.
And that's exactly how it should be. And I've been doing this for 30 years or so. I think I've been to an employment tribunal about 5 times. I think in terms of the number of people I've been directly involved in them being dismissed, I don't think I'm much over double figures in all that time. Most of the time, people come to a realization that they need to walk away, or we mutually agree that it's time to go, and we give them their notice pay or whatever it might be, and they move on and they reestablish themselves elsewhere. There's a danger, I think, in terms of what I do, is that you only see that very small proportion of people who are doing a job which is, and they're not doing it right, and they shouldn't be in the profession. They shouldn't be in schools, and you're moving those people on. Most of the time, what happens in there, and you see it parents' evenings for your own kids. There's this wonderful set of professionals who know everything about your children. In my case, now my grandchildren. And you think this is remarkable. This is actually what schools are about. It's a force for good.
Yes.
I think if anything, the pandemic is, what are parents really going angry about now? We can't go to sports day.
My grandson is in a bubble that's burst. Exactly that, Frank. Sorry, Stan. Sorry.
But and so what we need to use, the momentum of this, is to say these are the things that are important in schools. I have to say, I'm not the believer that's, if you don't have a sports day, you'll never be a leader of a political organisation, because you've got to learn to win and lose and all that rubbish. But they are occasions, and they are part of the culture of schools that is actually what brings children on. And we need to be able to say now, look, it's about the culture, and it is about a Christmas play, and it is about sports days, and it is about times when you can come into school and interact, and you see the school as a whole. You don't just see the results in the paper at the end of the year saying this school's rubbish and this. We need to balance what we do to show that even those schools that are near the bottom of league tables are often really effective schools.
I mean, my view has always been that, it's always been much more interesting visiting schools that are struggling than the schools that are really just, got it made, because of actually the professional challenge that everyone's facing in the schools in the most challenging communities. It requires the most skilled leadership. And that's why it's a very humbling experience, isn't it, when you think, oh my goodness, I mean, these people are just awesome. If only I was about 10% as good as they are, I would have been so much.
I agree.
But don't worry, Frank, they're going to get an extra £10,000.
Well, God,
how many times has this been put forward?
I know. Actually,
we'll send the teachers from our really good schools into our really poor schools, and they will make a difference. No, they won't, because the teachers in the really poor schools is just as good as the teachers, if not better, than the teachers in the really good schools.
That's a right old one, isn't it? That's been knocking around now for, I don't know, but 25 years at least. We'll take the best teachers from the high-performing schools, Well, it's a different job altogether, isn't it? To be able to go and change the sort of social context and make the assumption that I'm really good over there, I'm bound to be really good. I think even the teachers who are working in the high performance schools go, I'm not really sure I could cut it there.
But I've got first-hand evidence of seeing that fall apart. I've seen that approach, and it simply doesn't work. And even the issue here is around bringing your leadership from, or a senior leader from one school, even in a sort of fairly close by, into another setting. That doesn't always work. And even though that person's got a lot of practical and effective practice in that particular school, to think that can be transplanted into a very similar school, perhaps only 3 or 4 miles down the road.
No. Well, I think
football manager syndrome.
It is. Yeah, that's a good point, Dave. Yeah.
When I moved to a school that was more middle class, we had one very disruptive pupils that all the staff wanted me to exclude permanently because he swore, amongst other things. And I was trying to tell them that in the school I'd just come from, in the city Salford, he wouldn't even be on the radar. He wouldn't, he would be a fairly compliant child. And people, their ability to deal with different children who've come up differently, who've got a different attitude, is really hard. And I mean, we've all, if you've been in school, you've had teachers that just don't get the needing to bend rather than snap. When a child kicks off, you need to understand a bit more about it rather than think if we set firm rules that will sort it out.
But I mean, it's interesting, this is all about the particular challenges of teaching in particular communities. But this week we had the National Audit Office issue a statement. We're basically saying that there've been something like £2.2 billion have been taken from school budgets over the 4 years up to I think it's 2020. And actually, the way that had taken place, they concluded that it makes it difficult to conclude that the DFE met its objective of funding schools fairly. And what we've had here is also the allocation of catch-up funding being allocated on a per pupil basis, despite the fact that we know that the most disadvantaged children have been, particularly in the north where we are, have been most adversely affected. And if you're thinking about this as a sort of family, we've got 3 children, but actually one of our children actually has got significantly more needs than the others. So we do what we think is the right thing to do to support that individual as much as we can. Sometimes that is at the expense of the other 2 who are more favoured, who are more able to support themselves. This approach is one where it is trying to treat, because predominantly the Conservative government has got southern seats and they've not been as badly affected as those of us in the north.
In the north,
I think it's just imagine somebody saying, it's gone by. The National Audit Office is saying it does not consider that the DFE has met its objective of funding schools fairly. Think about that.
Yeah. That's
Well,
their own audit.
the same mindset was with their great success of vaccination. When we had this surge in the northwest, and there was a request to send more vaccinations so we could do that. No, you can't do that. We have to spread them out fairly across the country.
Yeah.
What in your head says that's a good idea?
Like we've got a big hole in the ship here, and we've got a few small holes. So what we're going to do is we're going to spread it so that every hole gets a little bit of our help.
A little bit more. And it's come back and bitten them, I think, because there was a clamour, I think, when the vaccination rollout started for education professionals to be vaccinated. Yeah. And now we have this surge in children being sent home and staff as well. Had we done, we're all, clever after the event, but certainly from a staff point of view, had they been accelerated through that process, perhaps we wouldn't have the same worries, anxieties, understandable anxieties on the part of those working in schools. There's a high school in Chorley. It's in the press at the moment. It's shut. There are 23 staff off at the moment with COVID-related illness and a good number of bubbles missing. A lot of this,
could have been.
You could foresee this, couldn't you?
Yeah.
To some degree. Back in April, when the Delta variant became evident. How's this going to play? We know a bit more about this virus thing now. How's this going to play further on down the line?
We need to shore some things up here, don't we?
We better get them vaccinated. We better come up with a different testing regime.
Yeah, but I think
saying teachers don't need. When they said early on teachers should be a priority, and they said no. I read yesterday talk of compulsory vaccination for teachers. So you can't have both those arguments.
No, and it's not just teachers, is it? We must remember that in primary schools, the bulk of the personnel who work in primary schools are support staff.
Yeah.
Teaching assistants, welfare assistants, lunchtime welfare assistants, dinner ladies, dinner men, site supervisors. They're all there. They're all exposed. They're all frontline.
Yeah, well, schools are all saying to me at the moment that we're now in a situation that's worse than it was at its worst last year.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And we're virtually at the end here now, folks, but we're at a point where the schools are being blamed for sending the children home.
Yeah.
The people just don't realize that it's public health who are advising schools on what they ought to be doing. It's not as if the head teacher just suddenly says, oh, well, there you go. This sense that they're doing that actually is public health that are actually advising schools in terms of how to manage these virus attacks.
I was talking to Ed, worried about children's well-being and mental health, where he said it was 9 o'clock in the morning, children on the playground ready to come in, when he got the phone call to say that one of their bubble was now positive, had been tested, and the PCR had come back positive. So he said, I had to leave them on the playground to start with. Then it started raining, so I had to take them into the hall socially distanced. And he said the children were genuinely scared.
Yes.
They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know why although they know what's happening to them, you know, why are we being picked out? And he said,
unclean.
Genuine scared. Because what? Sorry, Dave, missed that.
Unclean.
Yeah.
That's what it is, isn't it? It's victimizing that child at that point.
Yeah.
Oh.
But he said, you know, if we're trying to do something for children's mental health, the way we're doing this is not good.
No.
You know, you all have to go home now for 10 days.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Well, gents, we've gone well past the 30 minutes. It's funny, isn't it, Dave, how it just rolls
It whizzes by.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It's been great.
As good as I thought it was
enjoyed
going to be. So thank you very much, Dave. We'd love to have you back, because I feel as though we've just skimmed the surface. So if you're willing to come back in a couple of months, it'd be great to have you.
I am indeed. Yes, it was a very enjoyable thing to do. It's nice to have a good old grumble, isn't it?
Only if there's enough to talk about in.
Well, we were struggling for things this time around, weren't we?
Well, I've still got about 7 things on my list that I wanted to cover. But anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week. From memory, I think we have Isha Asim back with us.
Oh,
next
are we?
week. Do you remember the student that is at one of the Manchester University's political environmental activist? So Isha's going to rejoin us. She suffered from hay fever last time, so she's keen to join us again, hopefully without the hay fever. But anyway, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks.